You know, the first athletics t-shirt that said, "So you want to play doctor, eh?" The first time feeling for thrills and heaves, of course, in our cardiac exam. The first and last Doc 2 project. The first and hopefully last MCC Step 1 exam. The first patient not standardized, the first order, the first diagnosis, the first procedure, the first page, the first night on call, and the first morning report after. Throughout these firsts, we mastered incredibly important topics, like how to fall asleep almost anywhere. You know, in class, in meetings, the subway, our weddings, without seeming rude. And we perfected the art of finding free food, avoiding questions from intimidating physicians, self-diagnosing ourselves with life-threatening conditions. Earth Tones, OMSW, the fashion show in Daffy, MedSoc class councils, student clubs, and those for the community. To Toronto Notes, we donated more than $400,000 from our class, wrote the Essentials, UTMJ, all the while keeping our marks above pass. I could work a lot on that poem. What an amazing journey. And yet, for all that we've done, there's so much more to look forward to. You know, today we've carried vaccination cards on a little piece of paper. And tomorrow, we'll have our entire histories encoded in a grate of sand. Today we do organ transplants. Tomorrow we'll have custom organs made to go. Today we take aspirin and warfarin. Tomorrow we'll take nanobots and designer drugs. Today you use MRIs and CTs. Tomorrow they'll be handheld. Today our doctors live in our cities and towns. Tomorrow they'll live in our global village. All this to say that medical advances have and will continue to march forward. The real challenge that awaits us is therefore less that of discovering the most effective cures, building the most equipped hospitals, or diagnosing disease ever earlier in its presentation, though we will certainly do these and we will do them well. No, our challenge in its most compelling form must be this: to increase access not just to what we have today, but to be forward-thinking enough to anticipate where the inequalities in this world will lie, and to take action to give those around us an equal fighting chance. As a society, we have the capacity, but it seems that sometimes we lack the will. There is a big difference, it seems, between knowing what to do and doing what you know. Let me end off with a very real and very personal story. Halfway across the world, in an urban slum, I first met Maya, a migrant worker in a rundown community center neighborhood. On one side, an outdoor barbershop, and a little further down on the other side, another barbershop that suggested to be much more. In the muggy heat of the 5-room clinic, I was soaked head to toe from the midday thunderstorm, and my stethoscope stuck to the patient's skin like a suction cup. When I touched my stethoscope to your back, "Please take a deep breath," I told her. She placed both hands on her 7-month-old pregnant stomach as I slid the stethoscope down her back. "Should I take a breath now?" she asked. I heard the scraping sound of something eerily foreign and familiar. I moved to see where I was placing my stethoscope, and my heart stopped. The skin on her back was so bruised and leathered by what seemed to be cigarette burns and the lashes of whips that she could barely even feel my stethoscope. I hesitated. "Can I ask you what happened?" I murmured. She looked at me with a mix of rage and sorrow, and the only thing I remember next was that the door was slamming behind her shut as I stood there shocked, feeling so incapable, embarrassed, staring at the sheet that was now floating out from her medical chart, age written, "?15 to 17, uncertain DOB, date of birth. "Can I ask what happened to her?" I asked Dr. Muck, my attending, now 65, who'd grown up in this neighborhood and who knew everyone's names. She comes here 3 days a week to help with the sessions we hold for the other girls," he said. "You should come." With that, he left. Over the next several weeks, I sat in on support group sessions as HIV-positive women in their teens to mid-20s, all at various stages of failing health for lack of adequate medication, laughed and cried as they shared their stories about nail polish and new shoes, hairstyles and work, and yet their discussions were at times so very far removed from their counterparts here. A war-torn past, abusive husbands, HIV-positive children, and arguments over which medications they should really be paying for. Now, out of the blue, a week later, as I was helping her clean up after a session, she confided in me. "I was raped and tortured," she said, "when there was a war back home." uncertain to follow, staring at the back of her black shirt. In bright yellow letters in bold, it said, "I can do so much more." My mom, she said, I think she had HIV. I think that's how I got it, not the other way. That's why she died. As I sat down and listened to her story, she described a life so far removed from the luxuries I looked forward to returning to in a few weeks' time that I couldn't help but hate myself for living such a privileged life. The day before I left, she left a little sticky post-it note on my bag. She wrote her address and she wrote, "Keep in touch." When I returned to the clinic a year later, I found out from the neighbors that her husband had passed away and that she was living on the streets. A week later, I was at the registration desk of a hospital connected with a local NGO when I heard her unmistakable voice and the screams of a baby. I could not believe what I saw. Maya was a shadow of her former self. Her hair had fallen out in clumps. S&D, someone had remarked, skin and bones. Blood lay stagnant beneath her skin and her bones jutted out at every angle. She wasn't slowly dying. She was waiting to die, begging on the streets, rocking a baby now. She named him Wati, who she'd named after the author of the book, The Little Engine That Could. Several months later, when I saw her on the other side of a webcam, still keeping in touch, I again couldn't believe what I saw. But this time for the better. It was an incredible change. "What did you do?" I asked her. I was baffled. She looked even better than the first time I met her. She was now on antiretroviral medications, living in a house with other HIV-positive women, and had become a local hero for helping others like her to get treatment. I stayed in touch, but didn't hear from her for about 6 months after, and returned sometimes later, finding Maya this time in the palliative care ward of another hospital. She flashed that same mix of anger and sorrow when I asked her about Wati. She'd been splitting her HIV medications with him from the start. That's why she'd gotten to where she was. She simply couldn't afford it. Still, even in her state, from that hospital bed, she did more for the benefit of women and children living with HIV than so many other people ever could have. She was eventually moved back to the original house in the room that her husband had passed away. I was there, in her room, with 2 of her friends and Wadi on a Sunday afternoon, just as muggy as that day that I met her in the clinic, thunderstorm outside, when she passed away. And I remember Wadi wearing a shirt she'd made for him, stitching in bold yellow writing on the back, just like the story of the train, and said, "I think I can." Now this story is very real, but it's really a metaphor for our challenges. Whether the inequality is within our borders or beyond, whether the chance and tragedy of life is in our favor or not, like Wadi's shirt, I think we can do so much more. This is our challenge, and what those we thanked for in the beginning have prepared us for. Rudyard Kipling once wrote, "If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, then yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be the greatest MD, my son." And so it is that we leave here today in thanks of those who challenged us and believed in us throughout our run of medical school, and who made this unforgiving minute unforgettable. Yet having reached the end of our run, let's not forget that we leave here today with a privilege and responsibility, awesome in its promise and potential. We leave here today as more than doctor preceding and MD proceeding our names, ready to change the world. We leave here today as so much more than what lies behind us, a fraction of what lies before us, and forever changed for what now lies within us. Thank you.